Zach, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. We thought that some of our previous podcasts have been a little bit too Q&A-y and maybe not so fun to listen to. So one of our thoughts was maybe we just record a conversation, and we thought you would be the best first guest for this type of show, just given you've been in the industry, you've been doing construction tech for a while, and you're kept up to date on just all the stuff that's going on in the industry. And that's why we decided the format for this. Given Bhragan here, he releases a weekly newsletter talking about, what are the latest news going on in the construction tech space. We thought it'd be a good idea to just cover some of those topics and get your take, my take, Bhragan's take, and just kind of have a conversation around the latest topics on construction tech.
Thank you. Honored to be the first guest for this format type, and looking forward to geeking out.
Yeah.
Great. So going through what we talked about or what I saw in the news last week and was on the newsletter, there's two key topics that I would love to hit on with both of you, which is one is just US infrastructure trends. We're seeing a rise of AI infrastructure spend and data center spend. There's also an impact on green manufacturing and renewable build out with Donald Trump now coming in power and having a very different perspective to the previous administration. And then we'll also touch on Autodesk layoffs, which was the big news last week as well. So jumping into the first one and giving you a quick overview of what we saw in the last couple of weeks on the AI data center spend side, we saw Stargate come out from the Trump administration, but really OpenAI, Oracle, and SoftBank saying we're going to spend at least $100 billion on AI data centers. At the same time, we've got big tech going, we have $300 billion in CapEx on data centers. The EU just made an announcement. Alibaba in China made an announcement. Everyone's talking about AI data centers. So yeah, I'm curious what you guys think of. Is this growing? Is this interesting for construction tech startups? Is this a segment that maybe you should focus on selling to? What do you really think about when you see this?
Happy to kick off here. I mean, yeah, it's undeniable the tailwinds around the data center. I think Dodge Data and ENR and others need to break out data centers as their own kind of category in a lot of the economic metrics that you see reported, where other non-residential doesn't do it justice when it's kind of lumped in with that, just because given the magnitude of the spend and some of the numbers that you laid out. I think a lot of those plans were already in place. I know Apple might have revised their numbers up a little bit. Part of the announcement around the $500 billion, I think, was a little bit of bending the knee to the current administration, kind of pledging your share of investment in America. But as evidenced by David Sachs, being the crypto and AI czar, there's top level support. They see AI as a strategic imperative for the United States to maintain its lead. And so I think you're going to see a tremendous amount of continued tailwinds around every aspect of the value chain there, including the power generation to the actual data center and compute coming online.
Yeah, and I feel like, I don't know, it's interesting to see all this stuff in the news because the increase in the amount of data center build has already been growing in the last 10 years. And I don't even know if it's more exponential growth in the last couple of years, but with cloud and even Meta, when the whole metaverse thing was happening, right? Meta did a huge investment for metaverse, which, it was good because that got them ahead for AI. But the last company that I worked for, DPR, they were already tracking and trending more and more data center work coming down the pipeline in the last decade. And they were looking at it from both a US as well as an international perspective, right? And even with regulation change in Europe with GDPR, it was okay, well, now we need data centers in all of these different countries and all of these different locations. So I feel like there's already been a lot of other things happening in the world that's already causing more data center spend. But I guess right now, the interesting thing is there's a greater speed component to it. I think that's what's really driving more construction technology adoption. It's that we do have the labor shortage, but there's also the we need to get this online ASAP. And then there's manufacturing, supply chain shortage, and all of those challenges. So I think, we're at this interesting point where it's probably just enough demand and enough other kind of factors where it's okay, now we really need to figure out what are the technologies that we can leverage to then either operate data centers better or manage the construction process of it better. And I don't know, Zach, if you've seen an increase in data center projects on the Runvik side or what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not just Runvik's proprietary data. You just got to read the news, right? Meta announced a $10 billion data center in Louisiana, Turner, DPR, Mortensen joint venture. I think that data center is going to be a mile long linearly. This is the size and scale, and that's just a $10 billion one. There's hundreds of billions of dollars. So being kind of promised by each of these hyperscalers, because the reality is that around AI, the limiting factor for a lot of the training, and especially with the inference models and the reasoning models, the load on compute is 20x, a standard 3.5 query. So you absolutely have to spend the money to bring the compute online to have that and maintain that technological advantage. Stuff like DeepSeek might change a little bit of the calculus, but I think these newer reasoning models are still going to have a market there. And so the amount of dollars that we're talking about, it's unprecedented in terms of any facility type in the history of the world that I'm aware of.
Do you really think about that? Because I was chatting with Alice just before, and I was saying, if you're building a construction tech solution and it's pretty universal in how it could be delivered, do you go, AI data centers are being built out, let's just target contractors in this market and then get case studies for this market and just have a couple of unique features there. So then I can get the other contractor, and I know there's a big project pipeline. So I was like, is there an ideal project profile that you almost think of similar to an ideal customer persona, maybe?
I definitely think there are some. I think Doxel is targeted the data center space where they're really focusing on tailoring their solution to building data centers. I think Iris also has kind of focused in on that market segment and are selling into those owners and those builders, because with those dollar amounts that we talked about, the big nine-figure dollar amounts, 12-figure possibly, needing to deliver those cost effectively and get the most bang for your buck is going to be super important. So it's a huge market, right? And I think everyone from outside the industry looks at construction tech and kind of lumps it into one industry. But the reality is it's probably like 80 different industries with all the different subsectors, and whether you're a subcontractor or a general contractor or an owner, and then, the project types. And there's 100% enough addressable market within the data center build space for a lot of companies to go after that and deliver very tailored solutions to that end market. But I'd be curious to hear how Alice thinks about it from the venture capital side of the house.
Yeah. I mean, I think it does make a lot of sense where when we look at it, it's what is a contract type is probably the first kind of differentiation, right? If it's like a EPC type project, or if it's design bid build, I think that has a lot of implications in terms of what types of technologies might make sense. But yeah, it's like from there, then you start getting into like market segment, right? Because even on the commercial construction side, right, there's like hospitals, data centers, clean rooms, like all of that is kind of under commercial construction. But the way that the ownership structure, or even the way that you may communicate or collaborate across the design team or the owner side, that would be very different. Or even decision making, right? In a healthcare facility, you have doctors that you need to bring in the loop to help make decisions on certain things. Whereas for the data centers, it's like, well, we've built 50 of these already. We've already optimized our design. We know exactly what we want. We literally just need someone to put it all together. So that's also very different, right? Because then that's very different like drivers for their decision-making around technology adoption. And particularly with data centers, I think because it's so driven by speed now, there's like the three factors that you look at, right? It's like cost, quality, or schedule. And, you can't have all three in terms of what's good. So I think for the data centers, they want the quality and they need the speed. So they're willing to pay. And we are seeing this where contractors are turning projects away because there's so much data center build demand. But at the same time, when you're turning work away, that allows for contractors to actually bid with a higher price, right? And we are seeing trade contractors do this. So with a higher price, do you then reinvest that money into efficiency in terms of technology adoption, or do you just pocket it? I don't know what's going on. It does sound like, there is more technology adoption, but even just looking at the history of DPR, my last company, when they were first founded, a lot of their clients were tech companies. And with the tech companies, they were a lot more focused on quality and speed versus price. So those were actually some of the best clients to work for because they wouldn't nickel and dime you on everything. They were like, we know you're quality people. We're willing to pay to have a better relationship, better working relationship on the project, blah, blah, blah. Obviously, this isn't the same for like every tech company, but I think generally speaking, like the more forward thinking clients are more interested and willing to either pay for technology or be open to leveraging technology on their projects.
Is it dangerous then if I go, hey, I built a construction tech startup, let's just focus on data centers, and then all of a sudden DeepSeek comes around and everyone goes, we don't need more data centers. Am I stuffed? Like, because now you create project risk as well as everything else that's risk with a startup. And I need to go, oh, this is my beachhead. I need to broaden out, but I'm working so well in this segment. Maybe I'll just pour gasoline on this fire. Is that something you actually need to think about, or is that not real?
I mean, that sounds like a bad founder. Honestly, like you should never build something, especially for construction where so many processes are kind of similar across the different market segments. Like you're trying to build the biggest, baddest company out there, right? Like you should never limit yourself to one type of customer, one type of project, or one type of market segment. So I think it's good from a like beachhead perspective, but from a product perspective, you've got to be thinking across the supply chain or across market sectors or whatever. Like we do not invest in startups that will only build one feature of a product for.
But then, like, going on that same point with Donald Trump and the renewable build-out potentially getting affected, you saw, at least I was hearing a lot of robotics startups focusing on solar parks initially because it was really repeatable. But now with Donald Trump, we go, will we continue to have this level of investment? And now all these robotics startups, are they potentially, a little bit at risk because this could be affected?
Yeah, I think there's a ton of non-market risk in the United States, especially right now, with the volatility and the speed that the current administration is doing things. And, I think I was reading today or yesterday around some of the money that they're trying to claw back that had already been appropriated by Congress and authorized under the Biden administration, and trying to claw back a lot of the money around, I think this was around EV charging infrastructure at GSA buildings and stuff. And so I'm glad we have a diversified customer base and product that doesn't focus on any one of those market segments, because if you are at a startup where you've got 12 to 18 months of cash runway and you're needing to hit growth targets, there could be a 12 to 18 month mess ahead of us in the courts before there's any resolution around whether or not these projects get greenlit. And there's probably a lot of projects that are just going to get put on pause. And so I think there's a lot of non-market risk that if I was an investor, I would be very, very careful about the bets I have made in those spaces and what contingency plans they're making to diversify out of them, and would not be making any new bets in those spaces until there's a little more clarity around what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, even last year before the election, like year of election, early last year, as I was catching up with climate tech focus funds or funds that look at climate tech, like they were already like, we're going to slow down on investing in this whole area just because we don't know what's going to happen in November. And this is like a year in advance, right? So, I mean, I think so much of it is going to be speculation and emotion. And frankly, for venture, you are still kind of investing based on that, right? Because like you don't know what the world is going to look like. You don't know what the investor sentiment is going to be in 12 to 18 months. So even as our portfolio companies are raising, it's like, well, shit, like we don't know what's going to be the next hot whatever, right? So like even as you're building up your metrics or trying to figure things out, right? It's like, how do we tailor the pitch? Like you really can't do that until like right as you're going out to fundraise and get the latest information from, someone who just completed a round, because like things just change so quickly and drastically. And I always call it like, what's the flavor of the month, right? Like, what is that hot thing that everyone's investing in? And if you're not in that, then it's like, well, you better have your metrics.
Yeah, I think, a lot of times people don't talk about the luck component of startup success or the lack of luck in startup failure. Somebody that was building for making more efficient LNG terminals and more efficient LNG processes could catch tailwinds of the new administration, but you would have had to start that company in a different administration where it was a very contrarian bet to be making. But I'm sure there's some companies out there that are going to catch some tailwinds and be getting chased by all the investors that can find them to put money into those businesses. But I've always kind of had the mentality of just solve big problems. And if it's a big enough problem, it's got a little bit of durability to changing non-market conditions like, political administrations, tariffs.
Yeah. And the great thing about construction is there's a lot of job security. Like construction is never going away. We always need more housing. We always need more something, right? It is a basic human need. And I think that's the interesting thing about the construction industry, and probably also why things haven't changed. Is like it's been around for so long, and it is a process that it's like, well, if it's worked for so long, why do we need to change it? But yeah, with construction, it's like as long as you can figure out how to diversify across customer base, market vertical, even geographically, like there's always going to be construction happening somewhere in this world.
I think it's like a good warning on specialization, because I know like in the Australian market, there's a lot of redundancies right now. And especially if you're a really specialized engineer on, for example, bridge design, we're not building certain infrastructure right now. So I think it's also a statement on the startups and thinking about it, like in the same way that you've got to almost think about career risk as just a construction professional and specializing in specific design. You probably need to think about that as a startup. You're being like, maybe I'm doing bridge design, but what happens if we're not building that many of them anymore?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think Alice's point around construction not going anywhere is a pretty valid one, but the A and the E are a little bit more vulnerable to technology.
Oh yeah, the AI. Yeah.
Yeah.
That could change.
I feel like that's a good segue into our second topic, or the other topic we want to talk about, which was the Autodesk layoffs, which, it is focusing on AEC and other industries as well, but they had a really large layoffs, which has affected, a number of people, and it's terrible. But I know, Zach, you were making some points around how this has been a broader tech trend as well.
Yeah, look, Autodesk announced their layoff 9% of their workforce the same day that Hewlett-Packard announced a very similar size layoffs. Even Goldman Sachs a couple days later said they're going to lay off 3 to 5% of their VPs. I think for especially the tech companies, I even look at Autodesk as being a little late to the game, to the trend that was started a year ago when you saw Meta, Google, Salesforce, all these companies almost immediately cutting staff. They kind of had the top cover where their public stock price was not going to get punished by doing so. And then, quite the contrary, it actually got rewarded. And so these companies are more profitable than ever. Earnings per share are up, and I think a lot of them are able to replace jobs with AI. I think AI will create a lot of jobs, but I think I'm of the opinion right now that net of the job creation, there'll actually be significant job loss, and there'll be a real need for retooling, reskilling. You're seeing it kind of at companies around the world where a customer support manager can be automated, with an AI that does as good of a job as a human, but doesn't require benefits, can work around the clock, isn't part of a labor union. And so at the corporate level, it's almost irresponsible fiduciary responsibility not to be making those cuts.
Yeah. And I think it's like right now it makes a lot of sense for tech, right? Because so many of the AI tools if you look at some of the biggest, fastest growing AI companies, they're all like AI tools for software engineers, or it's like AI tools to help make software development faster, easier, whatever, right? So it makes a lot of sense that like for the tech companies, this is happening. But looking at construction, and I'd love to get your guys' take on this, because I feel like this is what we've been trying to figure out in the last, I don't know, maybe couple of years is, how much do we need construction specific AI versus generic AI, right? And like one really great example is with contracts. It's like there's a lot of legal AI tech out there, and then we have some construction specific ones. And it's at what point does non-construction specific become good enough to be able to do construction? Or even like computer vision, right? It's like, with some of the new, like we've had really like construction focused computer vision companies doing safety or progress tracking or what have you. But I'm hearing that some of these new models from the Llama model or any of these models, even the new reasoning, the OpenAI reasoning model, they're actually getting really good at images and potentially drawings, right? I think for us, like our unique thing is drawings, details, right? There's just so much like random complexity in how do we build a building. And I keep going back and forth on like, do we just wait because there's going to be some new model that's potentially going to, be like so far ahead, or do you do it now? I don't know. I don't have an answer to this. I don't know if anyone does. If there is a VC that does, I'd love to hear it. But I'd love to hear your guys' take, Zach, even as you're thinking about implementing tech or, I don't know what the answer is.
No, it's a good question. And I think there will always be a market for construction specific solutions. But I do think that increasingly people that know how to use the horizontal solutions can apply them to the construction industry. You can build defensibility around having the largest, training set of construction contracts that you get from your customers. Like that's an area, talking about the legal space where I don't know if an Adobe or an Ignite has the ability to kind of do something similar with that level of detail. Maybe they do. So I would look at kind of like defensibility, but construction has so much nuance that if there's features that really address the specific need of either the owner or the general contractor or how payments are done or something like that, like because construction, when you look at like the other large addressable markets, construction is actually quite small in terms of technology spend. And so a lot of more horizontal and other, like Workday, a good example, large publicly traded company, we're seeing them now more and more kind of focus on construction, but it probably wasn't one of the first 5 or 10 markets that they went after. And so I think potentially you see some of the larger, more horizontal players either acquire those specialized people to bring their solution into that market or begin over time to build functionality that addresses it. But I think that tension is definitely going to exist on any investment committee meeting on a Monday afternoon when deciding whether or not to back a vertical, AI company in the construction space.
What do you think about then generative design? I know on the design side, there's an expectation that a lot of the prelim and early stages of design should be done by AI. And then I think that's a question of can a horizontal or some of the things that are being built be applied to design, especially like for water infrastructure, you probably need something different to roads because that's quite different as the way that you design it. And those data sets are sitting behind company paywalls or like firewalls, and they're sitting behind owner firewalls. So how different is that to what AI is already building and how can it be applied? So I think that's really interesting.
It's a super interesting question. Can you just give all the textbooks for civil engineering to the AI and then actually get a design and all the building codes and all the relevant regulations that they need to meet? Could they then, without any prior like designs, actually generate a better design than what humans have been designing all along? Maybe.
I think the interesting thing about this is and actually not just this, but across a lot of different AIs for construction is data, and particularly historical data. And I've always been the biggest skeptic of any company that's give me all your historical data and I'll give you, the best insights or whatever, because most historical data is shit. And I'm just going to say that outright. Because if you look at, I had to manage the as-built handover process and just going through that painful process of, is this accurate? Is this not accurate? It was BIM as-built handover. And it was, but the guidelines are, it could be within a foot or it could be within whatever. So you have all these pseudo guidelines, but then there's also practice. And there are no accurate as-builts anywhere. And especially if you're dealing with 2D and PG&E as-builts from 30 years ago, it is not going to be accurate at all. And when you're looking at cost information, right, there's so many issues around what was the initial price versus cost, right? That's always a huge delta. How many contractors have actually fed that information back into whatever the original estimating system was to verify, right? So almost every key piece of data or what is considered proprietary information by these contractors is not accurate information. So what, it's either inaccurate or it's fat fingered or there's some issue with it. So you're going to have to, I don't know, build an AI to figure out what's right, what's wrong, get a human to review it and fill in the blanks or whatever. I think it's a way harder problem. And maybe this is why we need construction specific.
Yeah, but I'd push back on that because I would say that, especially on the design side, I've never used an as-built to create a new design, but we will always look at the 20% design or the prelim design and then just not copy, but you're using that as the basis of your design. We never do that entire loop. We always use the same design. So even if as the as-built there was a lesson learned, unless that same engineer knows that on the project, we are going to make the same mistake on the next project. So there's an argument that we have all those designs. I'm not saying it's better, but I'm saying that's what we currently do.
That's not AI. That's just called templates. You're just using templates and people are disguising it as AI. Like, let's just be honest and real. Like, we just want templates for work, right? And it's like,
parametric design is what they'd say.
I mean, but then if you look back at like Flux Factory, when we started Runbix back in 2014, Flux had just spun out of Google X.
Google,
like, the first company to spin out of Google X it was too early. It was before LLMs existed. But the idea was, can I ask for a building and give it some prescriptive requirements and hit enter, and I get 10 different versions of the building and 10 different price points and 10 different scheduled delivery dates, and pick my option from the menu, and then use that to go do more of a design bid build kind of contract structure. Google, who's always been a leader on this, I mean, their first use case was design, construction design, which was super interesting.
Yeah, I think it's a dream of the industry, but I think what's going to differentiate these companies is needs to be close enough to the workflow where people are still very comfortable with it. And you really need a deep understanding of what decisions people want to make versus what decisions people don't want to make. Because I could totally see in certain types of projects where you may be able to like auto-generate 20% of it. Versus like data, like we talked about data centers, you can almost auto-generate all of it because it's all pure calculation and optimization. But if you're building a children's hospital, like depending on the demographics of the kids that you're going to service or the doctors, like there's all of these other factors that are going to impact how do you design that space that I don't think an AI is going to be able to do that. So it'll be more human in the loop. So I think it's a matter of, what is the percentage of human in the loop when it comes to that automation?
But that's how we always thought about it, of you put the parameters in and then you tell the drafter to draft it up, right? Like I put my markups on a template and then the drafter marks it up. What's the difference between me putting my parameters into a model and then the model creating and doing what the drafter is doing? It's just me putting my engineering insight and then applying it. Same way with software where I prompt it and then I review the code it's done, give it a markup, and it updates. And I think that's still a massive benefit to what we're doing, because it can take 2 days for a draft design, especially if we're using an offshore resource. It's just a really long time. So even something small as a 5% change, or, instead of me modeling the whole thing, it just like creates like the entire, I don't know, whatever it needs to create for that next step, saves me massive amounts of time.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the primary reasons like BIM never got to mass adoption was the cost of doing, level 200, level 300 BIM model was cost prohibitive. But if you're able to use Gen AI to take a lot of that cost out, maybe we finally get to the vision that's been around for 30 plus years around BIM. I know Brick and Mortar is in a couple different Gen AI companies. I'll be curious to hear Alice's thoughts on kind of how they look at that space.
Yeah, I mean, I think the AI space is really good for like very specific parameters and like very specific calculations, right? Like I think any optimization problem or like a math problem, right? Think of it like a math problem. I think we should AI the hell out of all of that. But when it comes to creativity, I think that's where I'm kind of more skeptical. So when we did the investment in Hypar, they weren't focused on architectural, because my opinion is like, I think architects are going to want to go talk to users, touch and feel, there's so much more creativity in that. And I think you'll have some AI that does, the inspirational kind of stuff, right? And I think that's great, but like, how much are people going to be willing to pay for that when so much of it is free, or there's Pinterest, or there's, whatever, right? So I think it's more, what is the value of that AI and what is the willingness to pay? That's another big factor. And the stuff that people are willing to pay for and that AI is really good at is doing all the manual tasks that people don't really want to do. So your example of drafting, I think totally. But that only works after you as the creative have already made the decisions and you kind of know what you want, right? So give it to the computer to do that, right? Calculations, populating things in a 3D space, right? Like I don't think engineers should go draw pipe in a 3D space. Like we should just tell it, this is the start, this is the finish, these are the parameters, fill it in. So I think that's why construction is so interesting, because there's so many different scopes of work, and there's certain scopes of work where it's like, we're not going to have an AI go do that because you do need that personal touch. But for the guts of the building, it's like, like no one's going to care where the ductwork is routed, right? Like as long as you draw in, don't block these clearance spaces, there's equipment access, all that. So like, as long as you've figured all of that, like, computer, go optimize.
But like that is the wider trend across industries. It's not AI specifically replacing jobs. It's AI augmentation of me saving time because I have human expertise and I don't want to do this task. So let's get AI to do it. And I think that's it, right? Like we just make everyone go from, if it's 1x to you can do 2x. And that's a massive improvement. And I think if anyone said, I can replace your construction role using AI, I'd be very skeptical. But if you said, I can make everyone at a job site do things a little bit faster, I'd be like, yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think there's a lot more demand for construction than we have the capacity to bring said demand online. So right now, exactly what we need is a force multiplier tool. You hear about like Copilot for software development, can turn any software developer into a 10x engineer, and so I think the same could be said as we see more of those tools come online for generative design, like layout, a variety of like very specific, well-defined to the point around needing to kind of limit the parameters around what you're doing. The reason, one of the reasons construction is one of the least digitized is just a typical project has 50 to 200 different stakeholders and unique companies coming together. One or several owners. The Transbay Terminal in San Francisco is like 7 different public agencies had a say on what that facility needed to do, and so that sort of complexity will be very, very difficult for any amount of AI to do 100% of. But you might be able to do more of those around the world because you can reduce the cost by 50% because you can actually take a whole lot of the highly technical design work out of it, the cost of that design work, and still be able to deliver it with better AI native tools.
I feel like that's the end of the pod, but I wanted to say, Zach, thanks for coming on. And I feel like this is just us learning out loud. That's what I felt like I was just doing, which is really fun. So I feel like this is,
I love it. Like it was fun, just kind of thoughts and ideas. We've got 3 unique perspectives on the call, so it was good conversation.